Hello, everyone, and welcome to the San Francisco Opera Guild's virtual preview of the summer series Mozart's Idomeneo. I'm Lauren Erickson, San Francisco Opera Guild board member, and we're thrilled to welcome back Rebecca Plack to learn about this less mainstream but cherished opera. Before we jump in, I'd like to share just a little bit of information about the San Francisco Opera Guild and our mission. We were established in 1939 and a separate nonprofit organization from the San Francisco Opera Association. Many of our programs are in support of the opera, including these opera previews, but our primary commitment is to bring quality education and arts engagement programs to schools and the greater community. You might be familiar with our school programs, such as Opera Together, formerly known as Opera à la carte, and our student dress rehearsal program, but we have an incredible variety of offerings for students K through 12 to ignite a creative spark and grow curiosity about the arts while teaching collaboration, self-esteem, along with critical and metaphorical thinking skills. I encourage you to learn more about the Guild's work by visiting us at sfoperaguild.com. For today, if you have questions throughout the event, please drop them in the chat or the Q&A, and we will do our best to address them. Now on to the main event. We're pleased to welcome soprano and musicologist Rebecca Plack, who is professor of opera studies and music history at the San Francisco Conservatory of Music, my alma mater. She has also taught at the Vancouver International Song Institute. She's performed solo recitals for the International Great Romantics Festival in Hamilton, Canada, at the Atterforum Festival in Ferrara, Italy, and at the Franz Liszt Museum in Budapest. She's also given talks and lecture recitals at Oxford University and at meetings of the American Musicological Society. Her opera credits include leading and featured roles with Ithaca Opera and Sacramento Opera, as well as with the Carrymore and Aspen Music Festivals. She graduated magna cum laude from Princeton University, received her master's from the Manhattan School of Music, and earned her doctorate at Cornell University, where her dissertation explored connections between vocal technique and musical style in recordings of German Lieder. She lives in Davis, California, where she maintains a private voice studio. Welcome, Rebecca.
Thanks so much, Lauren. Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you too. I wanted to start today's preview discussion by saying I personally love this opera. Um, it's
Me
some of
too.
the most gorgeous music. And I could be biased because when I was in my master's program at the conservatory, I performed S'io non moro questi accenti at my graduate recital. So it holds a real special place in my heart. But I wanted to get your thoughts on why do you think Idomeneo has not landed in that mainstream repertoire of opera companies?
I think, wow, okay. A couple things. One, it's a really difficult sing. I mean, kudos to you for doing the duet on your master's recital. But it's a 3+ hour long opera, and the music's incredibly difficult vocally. It's very hard for well, for pretty much everybody. All the principal roles. It requires two tenors. It requires a dramatic soprano who can float a really easy top. I mean, it's a hard sing. And then also, two things that I'll talk about today. One is that there aren't really a lot of songs in Idomeneo. You
Fair.
know, there isn't a lot of music that you can hum on your way to or from the theater. And some of the themes in it are really come directly out of the Enlightenment, but aren't as obvious to us, perhaps, as, say, the Enlightenment themes in Don Giovanni or Marriage of Figaro. So, a few things.
Yep. I always say that for being in a serious opera, I love that, spoiler alert, it ends in somewhat of a celebration, which
Yeah,
I think is rare and a pleasant surprise. So that's great. So why don't we take a look at the marketing poster from San Francisco Opera just for a quick minute
sure.
so we can take a look and see what jumps out at us. What are some hints that we might see in this production based on what we're looking at?
Well, as you said, spoiler alert. Um, here we see rising up out of the ocean waves, the trident of Poseidon or Neptune, and hoisted aloft on the trident is Idomeneus, the king of Crete. Um, he's being saved. We'll get to that when we talk about the opera plot. He's being saved by Neptune, but off in the distance is a figure who is as yet obscure to us. We can't see who it is. Neither can King Idomeneo, and that's what the plot hinges on.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, and I will let you take it from here.
Great. Well, I'm really happy to be here, and thank you so much for that lovely introduction. Um, Here we go. So my talk, I always like to focus these talks as much as I can on three main topics. They are context, analysis, and interpretation. Um, the contexts I'll cover in the introduction. Um, Namely, we'll talk a little bit about the circumstances surrounding Idomeneo's creation, also the plot's origins in Greek mythology, and its relationship to the genre of serious opera, opera seria, which actually Lauren touched on a little bit by noting that this opera has a happy ending. And then I'll go through the plot act by act. And while I do that, I'll pick up on a few different themes that I think are important when we see the opera. The first is this idea that emotions unfold naturally. This is in contrast with operas, serious operas from the early part of the 18th century, operas by people like Handel. So we'll look at how Mozart, instead of writing songs in this opera, really shows us people's natural emotions as they unfold in time. These emotions can be ambivalent, they can shift frequently, and that's part of what a huge part of Mozart's project in this opera. Then in part two, we'll go over the plot of Act Two and listen to a little bit of music from the chorus and take a look at how Mozart treats the chorus. We'll then move on to Act Three and touch on how Mozart writes for ensemble. And in particular, in this opera, we'll look at the Act Three quartet and how Mozart treats the ensemble as a kind of psychodrama. And then finally, when we've got the whole opera under our belts, we'll be in a position to understand how Enlightenment values are communicated by the opera as a whole. So before we jump in, I'll just also say that even though the basic plot seems obvious enough, and the music is really gorgeous, especially on the surface, um, these things are really complex in Mozart's Idomeneo. It's impossible to cover 3 hours and 10 minutes of really difficult music in a 55-minute talk. So, my goal in each of these sections is to give us the tools that we would need um, once we go to the opera, or if we sit down to listen to it or read some of the libretto beforehand. So that's just always my approach is to talk about these things not just in and of themselves, but as examples of compositional techniques or thematic material that lets us understand the opera as a whole. So let's get into a little bit of context. First, Mozart. I think that's always the easiest part. And hang on, I am gonna do one thing here before we start. Um, let's see. I I'm gonna reshare this. Okay. Sometimes I just forget to close windows and then I can't see my slides. So, Mozart and Idomeneo. Mozart had been in Paris in 1778, and then in 1779, he returns from Paris to Salzburg. He finds employment for about the third time, depending on how you count, in the court of the Archbishop Colloredo. Um, it's not the most satisfying work. He's a little bit on the outs with his father. His mother had died the year before, and so it's not the happiest time for Mozart, but he's working hard. And when in 1780 he's commissioned to compose Idomeneo for Munich during the carnival season, this is really exciting for him. He'd written several operas already, maybe 10 or 12, can't remember the exact number, including one, La Finta Giardiniera, for Munich in 1775. But this carnival opera was extremely important for a couple of reasons. One, it would be the only opera that was performed in Munich during the carnival season, and he had this incredible orchestra at his disposal for the opera, including horns, trombones, and this allowed Mozart to experiment with orchestral writing in opera in ways, we'll hear certain things that may remind us of, oh yeah, he does that in Don Giovanni, or he does that in Marriage of Figaro. Um, and it's partly for this reason, I think, that retrospectively, the opera would come to be thought of as his first operatic masterpiece. Um, Also, in the spring, immediately following its premiere, Mozart would travel to Vienna with the retinue of the Archbishop. He tries to leave. Ultimately, he's dismissed, and he's got Idomeneo in his pocket as a calling card of a full-length, serious opera that he can show off to people as he's trying to find work as an entrepreneur in Vienna. He certainly hoped that he could use Idomeneo as a calling card for future commissions. Now, as far as the mythological origins, I found this really interesting when I started getting into this opera because, as someone who's a fan of the De Ponte operas, for example, and some of the Singspiels, I thought it was really interesting that Mozart wrote this opera on using mythological characters. We'll get into that towards the very end of this talk. Um, but for now, just again for some context, in the Iliad and the Odyssey, Idomeneus was not a terribly important character. He was a Greek general who fought alongside Agamemnon and Menelaus. And later versions would expand on this story that on his way home, and here we have our graphic, Idomeneus's ship was beset by a terrible storm. And in hopes of saving himself and his crew, he promised Poseidon that he would sacrifice the first person he saw when he returned home to Crete, if only Poseidon would save his ship. So that brings us to the plot and characters in the opera. The first plot that we have is a riff on the recognition and sacrifice plot, right? Idomeneo vows to sacrifice the first person he sees. Here's Idomeneo played in the Met production from 2017 by Matthew Polenzani, who will be playing the role here in San Francisco as well. And unfortunately for Idomeneo, but very fortunately for the plot, because it makes good story, the first person he sees when he returns home is his own son, the Prince Idamonte. Now, in Mozart's opera, this plot is threaded through with a second plot, which is a love triangle. And that love triangle includes Ilia, a Trojan princess whom Idamonte loves, and who loves Idamonte in return, but in secret. However, ultimately, she offers herself as a sacrifice to her beloved to save his life. However, she's not the only soprano in the opera who loves Idamonte. There's also Electra, the princess of Mycenae, who's also in love with Idamonte, shown here again in a still from the Met production from 2017, played by Elsa van den Heever, who will be singing Electra here in San Francisco this weekend, though I understand that tonight she's actually in New York singing a concert, which is just extraordinary. And of course, she's fresh off her portrayal as of Salome at the Met. So we're pretty lucky that we get to hear Elsa here in San Francisco. In any case, the plot takes place, given that the story takes place in the aftermath of the Trojan War, the competition between the two women, Ilia and Electra, should be understood in the larger context of this, the Judgment of Paris, which of course is the thing that that ignites the Trojan War, right? Eris, the goddess of discord, contrives to goad the goddesses Hera, Aphrodite, and Athena, shown here in this painting from left to right, into fighting over a golden apple that's inscribed to the fairest one, right? She tosses it into a crowd. It's picked up by Paris, shown here on the right, um, Prince of Troy. And so the goddesses then insist that Paris choose who's the fairest. Is it going to be Hera, uh, wife of Zeus and the goddess of marriage, family, uh, those sorts of values, or is it Aphrodite, the goddess of love, which here includes physical or sexual love, or is it Athena, the goddess of wisdom? Now, as we all know, Paris ultimately chooses Aphrodite because she promises him the most beautiful woman in the world, Helen, then of Sparta, married to Menelaus. But that's not a problem for Aphrodite. She can change things. Um, and Paris succeeds in winning Helen, takes her to Troy, and this ignites the Trojan War. So, in this context as well, the context of Greek mythology, it's also worth considering the character of Electra. Again, in the Iliad, she's merely mentioned as a daughter of Agamemnon and Clytemnestra, but opera fans, especially perhaps, are familiar with her story and that of her sister, Iphigenia. Their stories are elaborated on later in the fifth and I think fourth, maybe sixth, fifth and sixth centuries before the Common Era, so a couple hundred years after the Iliad, in plays by Sophocles, Euripides, and Aeschylus. So at the start of the Trojan War, um, the goddess Artemis demands that Agamemnon sacrifice his daughter and Electra's sister, Iphigenia, in order to reach Troy, and Agamemnon does. So Electra's father sacrifices her older sister so that the Greek armies may reach Troy safely. Um, After the war, Electra's mother, Clytemnestra, kills her father in revenge. And then after that, to avenge their father, Electra, and her brother, Orestes, kill their mother. So it's although no so we just need to know this because um, no ancient Greek or Roman source places Electra in the story of Idomeneus. Her inclusion here is a much later addition, but the parallels between Agamemnon's sacrifice of his daughter and the question of whether Idomeneus will ultimately sacrifice his son, these parallels, I think, are really obvious, and we have to have them in mind as we work our way through the plot and the music of Idomeneo. So, we'll consider these parallels as we go, but I just ask you to pay particular attention to these themes of sacrifice, and also of how Mozart expresses Electra's character through music. I really thought when I started getting into the music, I really had in my mind that Ilya and Electra were going to be juxtaposed kind of similarly to Pamina and the Queen of the Night, but they're not at all. The Queen of the Night really has a kind of performative, almost cartoonish rage. And Electra does express rage in this opera, but she expresses many other things too. So, sorry again, this is just full of spoilers, but if you didn't want spoilers, you wouldn't be at an opera talk, right? So, just one more thing before we hear some music, and that is the genre of Idomeneo. It's typically referred to by us as an opera seria, but I've got my little asterisk here because this genre designation isn't incorrect, but it needs a little unpacking and a deeper understanding. It's a little misleading with respect to the music, not the text, but the music. And Mozart, in fact, he himself, this is the advertisement for Idomeneo. Mozart himself used the more general term drama per musica, and opera seria as a term wouldn't be, was only applied to Idomeneo retrospectively, to Idomeneo and to many later 17th and 18th century Italian operas that were on heroic or tragic subjects. So, in fact, it's important to know that Mozart's Idomeneo is a hybrid of characteristics that come from opera seria, opera buffa, French opera, um, reform opera, that is, operas of Gluck. So, if in the last couple of years you've seen Handel's Partenope at San Francisco Opera. This is an opera seria, an early 18th century opera seria. Or if you've seen Gluck's Orfeo, this is a reform opera. So if you have those things in your ear, in your mind, in your memory, you'll be able to contrast um, Idomeneo, compare and contrast it in particular ways. The contrasts, of course, come from Mozart's innovation in orchestration and in melodic writing, as well as in musical form. And these things are propelled often by his incredible dramatic instinct. Also, I should have had on here his inclusion of ensembles and his instinct for characterization and drama. So, more specifically, as we'll see momentarily, many of the text forms in Idomeneo are identical to those of opera seria, and contrasting them with how we might expect an opera seria composer to set them gives us real insight into the musical style and the emotional realism, if you will, of Idomeneo. And that brings us right to the Act One, Part One of my analysis, which is this idea that emotions are natural. And this, I think, uh, fits in a certain way with this production by Lindy Hume, an Australian director, because her concept for the opera has to do with our relationship to the natural world. Um, and this mirrors in a really lovely way, I think, the Enlightenment preoccupation with human emotion as being natural, very much in contrast with the Baroque idea that human emotional states were objective, that we could objectify our emotional states. That's super different from what Mozart did. So we'll listen to bits and pieces of three arias here, introduce three characters for our opera. First, we'll listen to Ilya's aria, where she struggles with her guilt as a Trojan princess for loving a Greek prince. Idamante, that prince, approaches. He tells her that the fleet has been sighted. Electra, a Greek princess, enters. Um, Shortly after that comes the news that Idomeneo has drowned at sea. This turns out not to be true, but Electra fears that if that's true, she won't be able to marry Idamante. In the next scene, Idomeneo comes on shore and he reflects on his vow. Um, so this happens before he actually sees Idamante and realizes the implications of the vow that he's made. So let's listen to some of Ilya's aria. I printed the text here partly because in this production from the Met there are in this video there are no subtitles, but also I wanted to show you this text in two sections. This is the same kind of two-section text that would be found in an opera seria. Part of the reason that this opera is called an opera seria but Mozart doesn't set it in two sections the way he would, or the way Handel would, right? Handel would set this as maybe the first section would be about loss. We see farewell, I have lost you. Um, and maybe the second section it's hard to know what it would be about, maybe about her love, because she says, I can't bring myself to hate Idamonte. But we can't know. I'd love to have a time machine, go back in time and hand the text to Handel and say, so what would you do with this? But we can't. We have Mozart's version. So Mozart, because he's setting real emotions in real time, we get actually a kind of farewell motive, a call. She sings something like farewell, she sings, and then she sings a loss motive, a descending, I have lost you. We'll hear those things. Then after she goes back and forth between farewell and I've lost you, those horns come in. Horns always herald a kind of military topic, if you will, and she sings Greece. You are the cause, she says. And then the horns take it up a step and she again sings Greece. So we hear that kind of horn topic. And then when she starts to sing I Love a Greek, we hear the violins come in with this kind of, you'll hear it, it's kind of almost like pounding, like a heartbeat pounding on the inside of her chest. And I shall love a Greek, she says. So these are serious themes, and Mozart's using very carefully constructed orchestration. But this juxtaposing of one theme after another, this is a technique that comes out of Italian opera buffa from the 1720s, 1730s, and 1740s. Usually it's used in comic settings, someone saying, oh, I can't believe it, I can't believe it. Did this happen? Oh, and if that happened, right? And we get all these different kinds of rhetorical emphases. Mozart's taken those things and written these serious farewell, I've lost you, Greece. I love a Greek. And we hear all these things in Ilya's aria. This gets at Lauren's excellent question from the beginning. Why isn't this opera more popular? Well, if you don't know the Italian really well and you're not listening for all these kinds um, of short themes, it's really hard to sing this aria on your way home in the car. It's just not a tune that you can pick up on. So anyway, we'll listen to that first section and then we'll actually listen to it again and then we'll listen to the second section. Right. I mean, if we get all of that in the first 54 seconds of the aria, and we've got 3 hours and 10 minutes of music, of course, it's not all this kind of dramatic monologue. There are things that are more song-like, but that's a lot that Mozart packs into a short amount of time. I'm going to play it again, and then we'll talk briefly about the second section. So, uh, um, now we'll listen to the second section of the text. And what I invite you to listen to here are a couple of things. One is that the melody at the beginning is all scales. And scales are interesting because they we our ears recognize them as things that have a particular departure point and an arrival point. Um, so there's a kind of uh, almost like a requirement that they go there, kind of fatalistic, like she must love him. Also, these particular scales sort of go in circles, almost as if her thoughts are circular. There's also a transition to a major key here. So she doesn't sound so unhappy about loving him, even though there's this kind of inexorable, I can't help it, and I can't, my thoughts are going in circles. Um, and then there's a kind of cadence at the end. All of these things could be going on. What's fabulous about it is that the performer gets to bring it to life, and each of us gets to experience in our own way. So the things I'm saying, I'm trying to keep them general enough that the aria can land in different ways for different people, and it will also depending on the performance. So let's listen to this second section. And now Mozart goes into a section where he begins to repeat the first stanza of the text. Um, we have to leave it there, but hopefully lots more to think about as you listen to the second half of the aria. Um, I am not going to talk in quite so much detail about the this next aria, except to say it starts with some kind of spooky stuff that reminds me a little bit of how Mozart uses flutes in Don Giovanni. Um, uh, but I think for sure he's using the orchestra to evoke the Furies and hell. Um, that feels very Don Giovanni-like to me. And in the second half of the first stanza, we get not just the torment, but we actually get this um, love, pity, and mercy. I think this is important because, again, Mozart shows us an Electra who's not two-dimensional. She's not only the rival to Idamante's hand, or to yeah, to Idamante's hand, but she's also someone who, by the time she's here on Crete, um, has suffered really tremendously. So this is a very three-dimensional person. Um, let's listen to some of this now.
Tutto il cor vi sento, vi sento, furia di cruda guerra, furia di cruda guerra.
Right, those are the bitter furies, but now we're going to get with the violins, all of this da 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 all this leaning stuff that sounds like not well, if it's a torment, it's a torment with a lot of pathos. Um, this torment that's related to love, pity, mercy. Right. So now that she's finished saying twice, let her who stole that heart which betrayed mine, now she's going to say, feel my fury and cruel revenge. And we again get this kind of military topic. Um, all all of the children in this story, right? Electra, Idamonte, Ilia, they were all abandoned by their fathers for how long did the Trojan War last? 8 years, 10 years? They all grew up in the shadow of this war. It's not that surprising that in Electra's psyche, when she sings "Feel My Fury and Cruel Revenge," we would get pa-dum, pa-pum, pa-pum, pum, and that this would evoke for us, the audience, this sense of the power of her fury and the revenge she hopes to exact. So, I it's I, I don't know that I want to go quite so far as to say that Mozart's giving each singer a line reading because these things are very much open to interpretation, but it's the interpretation of the that spectacular amalgam of the text and the music, the text form, the musical form, and so on. We have the chance to talk about musical form a little bit more here in this next opera. And now I'm moving from the Met production of 2017 to this Opera La Scala production of 2006, which of course was the Mozart year, the 250th anniversary of his birth. Um, but here we have a different kind of text, not a two stanza text, but a three stanza text. And here Mozart sets the form he uses is one of this kind of two-tempo aria where we've got one kind of musical affect that then leads into a second one that are quite different. We see in the text, this is the aria that Idomeneo sings when he's landed on shore, but before he's seen Idamonte. And here, Enlightenment values really are being expressed because here we see a king who's grappling with the vow he made even before he knows it's his son. He's having an ethical and moral dilemma about killing a stranger to save himself. He's imagining that after he does it, he's going to see um, haunting him, this lamenting ghost, which is going to remind him over and over again, you killed me, but I was innocent. And he's very graphic detail. He's going to see the blood and remember his crime. So there are some things about this aria that I want to bring to your attention. Um, One of them is that the arias in triple meter, the first couple have not been. They really allow this kind of sense that the characters are talking. Idomeneo's also talking, but he's talking in triple meter in this kind of dance meter, which elevates him to the status of a king, um, in comparison with the other characters who've sung so far. Um, but also the opening melody, it's not a melody at all. It sort of meanders around as he imagines the ghost haunting him. Um, the um, the melodic lines unfold not in any kind of regular metrical pattern. So we really are hearing his musings in real time in a way. Also, the opening melody immediately subverts the key. It really shows, I think, his dilemma. He can't even stay in the key that Mozart established for him, even in the opening melodic gesture. So let's listen to some of that. We might listen to it more than once. Let's just see. I am going to play that opening one more time. It's so gorgeous. But because Mozart plays with time here in a way that shows um, that that Idomeneo is struggling um, with security in his thoughts. The intro is 5 measures long. His first statement is 4 measures long, and his but then when he repeats the words ombra dolente, he has 5 measures again. Now, in Enlightenment values include reason and balance, and so when Idomeneo sings a phrase that's out of balance, it shows that he's out of balance. So that's pretty neat that even though he's changing the key, which is sort of out of balance, he kind of keeps himself in balance for the first statement, and then he can't anymore. So even though he cadences in the key, the musical phrase demonstrates that he's not quite in balance in another way. Um, it's absolutely brilliant melodic and harmonic writing. I'll play it again and I'll hold up my fingers to count the number of phrases. I'm probably pretty small in your window, but anyway, let's see what we get. Five, one. And then interestingly, when he starts talking about his pierced breast, just looking at the text, I would expect, something really big and dramatic, but that's not what Mozart writes. Just continues to muse on this awful thing that he's going to see. We have to move on, but these are some ways that I would encourage you to let the text and music hit you, even if you're not counting measures like I just was. Trust your reactions. If you know the text, if you are hearing the Italian, following the subtitles, trust your reactions because That's really what Mozart was writing for us to have, are these emotional reactions caused by the music. Part two and act two, power to the people. Now, right before this happens, of course, there or between what we just saw and this, um, the first person Idomeneo sees is his son. He realizes his son, and his moral dilemma is increased thousandfold, because now it's not just some stranger he's going to kill, but it's his own child. So, at the beginning of Act Two, Idomeneo tells his advisor Arbace of his vow to Neptune, and decides that for Idamante's safety, he's going to pack him off to Argos with Electra. Ilia enters. She tells Idomeneo how happy she is to be on Crete. Idomeneo realizes that Ilia is in love with Idamante, though Ilia hasn't yet told Idamante this, and he's overcome by the pain and suffering his vow will cause, not only to Idamante, obviously, and to himself, but to Ilia as well. But then Electra enters and expresses her pleasure in having Idamante to herself, and that aria of Electra is just gorgeous, and so is the part that we are going to hear. The people of Crete assemble. They're looking forward to a safe voyage to Argos. And Electra sings how happy she is. That's what we're about to hear. Suddenly, a storm arises. The frightened people realize that someone has offended the gods, and they demand to know his name. Idomeneo says that he's the one who's offended the gods, but doesn't yet say how, and the crowd flees. And that's the end of Act Two. So I said we would hear a little bit of the chorus. Also, Electra in this scene is sung by Emma Bell. I'm sorry, I do once have to say it's a chorus of Cretans. And what's fabulous about this chorus, besides that it's just gorgeous, the way in which Mozart empowers them is just like Idomeneo did in the last aria. Here the chorus sings in triple meter. So just as Mozart expresses Enlightenment values by having Idomeneo struggle with his vow on several different moral levels, he's going to raise the status of the people by having them sing a minuet. So it's not only the king who gets to sing this dance associated with the nobility, but the chorus also does. What happens to the people in this opera is important. The trials, if you will, the terrible things that beset the people in this opera, they are important. Not only the decisions made by the king. So we'll hear this minuet chorus, and then we'll hear part of Electra's aria. Um, if if you listen to this aria without knowing that it's Electra singing, her music is totally indistinguishable from the arias sung by Ilya. It's one of the things that makes the role so difficult to perform, because it's high, it's sweet, it's lilting. It does all of these things that you wouldn't expect a cartoonish rage soprano to sing. And you might not expect Electra to sing it. Electra, who together with her brother, avenged the death of her sister and father by killing her mother. Mozart humanizes her in this scene. He humanizes the chorus, and he humanizes Electra. So let's listen to some of that. Again, beginning with the minuet. and so on. So we're going to hold all that about Electra lightly in mind as we move forward into Act 3, where we'll listen to the Act 3 quartet. In this section I'm calling Ensembles and Psychodrama. There are a few ensembles in this. There's also a stunning trio and a couple of duets. Um, at the beginning of Act 3, Idamonte tells Ilia that he will fight the monster that was sent by Neptune to plague the people of Crete, and that he may never return. Ilia reveals her love for him, and Idamonte begs his father to reveal the reason for his harsh behavior. Idomeneo doesn't answer. Idamonte departs. So at this point in the opera, we know about the vow, right? Think of how much tension this is creating for the audience. We know about the vow, but except for Idomeneo and Arbace, nobody else knows yet about the vow. Again, so important to have Electra there too, reminding us of the consequences of following through on that kind of thing. Now, the high priest of Neptune then demands to know from Idomeneo the name of the one to I'm sorry, they know about the vow, but they don't know that it's Idamonte. But finally, at this point, Idomeneo says, okay, the person I'm supposed to sacrifice is my own son. So in the quartet, right before Idamonte leaves, here we have Mozart doing this thing that he does so well. The first person who sings is the person who's somehow uh, in charge at the beginning of this scene, and it's Idamonte. He's saying, "Yep, I'm gonna go kill the monster." But just like in Idomeneo's Act 1 aria, Idamonte starts with something that sounds very militaristic. He sings bum bum ba bum bum bum. But at the end of that, instead of just finishing it, he goes bum bum. He sort of pulls off his motive and it leads into something else. So he starts out sounding like he's going to go kill the monster, but then he starts to wander until he finishes again in this sort of triumphant way. Ilya sings something that compliments him, and then eventually we have three characters singing together because they're somehow in alignment. Then we have Ilya and Idomeneo singing together in beautiful thirds, which lets us know, in case we hadn't figured it out, that they're in love. And eventually Electra joins, and we have this section where four people, each of whom is lost in their own pain for their own reason, but they're all each of them is singing, who could suffer more than I? It's just the brilliance of Mozart in this kind of psychological drama. He shows us each in their own world, but each all somehow in alignment. It's this extraordinary drama through music. Let's listen to it. And this is where the thirds come in, and we get this gorgeous love moment between the two of them, showing how aligned they are. And in the next moment, to show this terrible agony in a new way, Mozart suddenly writes this very new sounding music in a suddenly different key. I'll go back just slightly so we can hear that together because it's almost jarring when you hear it. Again, showing us the many psychological states, not showing us, imbuing these psychological states with the real feeling that the characters are feeling. And now, as in one of the in some of the earlier arias that we listened to, Idamonte is going to repeat the same text. They're all going to repeat the same text, but with different music, showing us that that human emotion is constantly changing. Even when we're thinking about the same thing, we might have mixed feelings about doing it. So, having gone through almost all of the musical examples that I have, and examples of many different kinds of music from the opera, I'd like to talk about Idomeneo as an Enlightenment remake of the story from ancient Greek times. So what happens next in the story? Well, here's the end, actually. Idamonte slays the monster, he returns, and he's ready to sacrifice himself at this point. Ilia intervenes, offering herself as a sacrifice in his place. But suddenly there's disembodied voice, an oracular pronouncement. Idomeneo must renounce the throne so that Idamonte may become king and be united with Ilia. Electra leaves in rage and anguish, and Idamonte is hailed as the new king. There's a lot to unpack there. We're going to do it this way. Stories reflect cultural values, right? In the 19th century, Grimm's fairy tales were very, very scary, right? I mean, these were things designed to frighten children into behaving. Behave or the boogeyman's going to come and all this horrible stuff is going to happen. Well, in the 20th century, these things got remade as Disney movies with singing chipmunks and even, I don't know, singing teapots and what have you. So stories reflect the values of the culture in which they are told. That's what our stories do for us. So, in early versions, Idomeneus actually does sacrifice his son. Why? Because in ancient times, perhaps what's most important is that that rulers obey a higher power and that people obey their rulers, but people obey a divine power. So if Artemis tells Idomeneus, you've got to, or tells Agamemnon, you've got to sacrifice Iphigenia, he does it. There's a similar sacrifice. It's Jephthah, I think, in the Old Testament, where Jephthah sacrifices his daughter. Of course, Abraham and Isaac. Now there, God stills the hand of Abraham, but these are early stories in which people are willing to do the thing that is most unnatural in order to show that they will obey a divine power. Well, this is, by the time we get to the 18th century, this has gone way out of fashion. We don't have any singing chipmunks, but in Mozart's version, and even in some versions from centuries before, the sacrifice is averted. It's done through Ilia's offer of self-sacrifice. Mozart lovers, opera lovers, this is maybe making you think of Pamina and the Magic Flute, right? This isn't the only opera where a woman offers to sacrifice herself. But also, we've got Idomeneo's moral struggle and his love for his son, right? The moral struggle is twofold. It's not just that he's struggling with whether to sacrifice his son. Even before that, he's struggling with whether he's going to sacrifice some poor unknown stranger. So I started thinking about this and wondering, was this all just Mozart and Varesco, his librettist? Were they the only ones who transformed this story? I thought not, because if you read anything about the sources for Idomeneo, you read that it was adapted from a French opera from 1712, Idomeneo, by the French composer Campra, who's nestled right there between Lully and Rameau, with a libretto by this fellow Danchet. And then you also read that this, in fact, had been an adaptation of a play by this fellow Prosper Joliot de Crébillon, also known as Crébillon Père. Um, and you read that this was, in fact, adapted or inspired by a novel, Les Aventures de Télémaque, fils d'Ulysse, a novel by this fellow, François Fénelon. And when I looked at this, I thought, well, this is interesting because these things were all written within 15 years of one another. And I thought, what was in the water? What's going on in France around this time? Um, why were all these things, these stories being told? And I found out that I decided to dig into the adventures of Telemachus, son of Ulysses, and found out that this fellow, Fénelon, had been the tutor, excuse me, to the Dauphin in the court of Louis XIV, the Sun King. The Dauphin was his grandson, and Fénelon wrote the Adventures of Telemachus in 1693-94 for the Dauphin as a kind of didactic novel, which would teach the Dauphin how to become a benevolent monarch someday, because Fénelon had become disillusioned with the opulence of the court, and so he wrote this novel as a critique of absolute monarchy. I thought, oh, how'd he get away with that? Well, it turns out that he never intended for it to be published. He wrote it, like I said, in 1693-94, and a few years later, a servant in the household got his hands on the manuscript and slipped it to a publisher. It was published in 1699. The plot revolves around the travels of Telemachus, who is instructed by his tutor named Mentor, which is in fact where the word mentor comes from, because this novel when it was published, let's finish out Telemachus and Idomeneus. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. I get really excited about this story. Mentor, where Idomeneus comes in, is that Mentor introduces Telemachus to Idomeneus as an example of a benevolent monarch. Now, in Fénelon's novel, Mentor is revealed to be the goddess Athena. Well, this is interesting because in this iteration of the story, it's Athena and not Aphrodite who holds the power. So in the original story, it's Aphrodite, right, the goddess of love and of sexual love, who ignites the Trojan War. But for Fénelon, it's not Aphrodite who's the most powerful. It's Athena, the goddess of wisdom. Now, I said I was getting a little bit ahead of myself, and I was, and I am, but I'll add now that the novel was published in 1699, as I said before. It caused a huge scandal, and it caused Louis the 14th to kick Fénelon upstairs, as it were. He was banished to Cambrai, where he was made the archbishop And this book, The Adventures of Telemachus, would become the second most widely read and frequently purchased book in France in the 18th century, second only to the Bible. It really is at the beginning of this Enlightenment project to change how our rulers behave. So the question then that I asked myself was, well, if it was so widely read in 18th century Paris, was Mozart familiar with Fenelon's novel? Were the Mozarts familiar with his work? After all, they were well educated, they were widely read and widely traveled. And in 1766, the Mozarts traveled to Paris for the first time. And their voyage is documented somewhat by letters, including this one. This is the exact letter in which Mozart's father wrote home to one of his friends. In Cambrai, he says, I looked upon the tomb of the great Fénelon and the column with the marble bust. He made himself immoral with his Télémaque, also these other books, and so on. So you bet the Mozarts were familiar with the work of Fénelon. And in fact, 4 years later, Mozart would write home to his sister, I'm in chapter 8 of The Adventures of Telemachus. Mozart at that time was 14 and he was reading Telemachus. Now, also recall that there was this 17, oh, I said 15, but I think it was 1712 opera by Scarlatti, Telemaco, on which there was the 1712 opera Idomeneo. There was also a 1715 opera by Scarlatti on Telemachus. This opera would then be the source material for an opera called Telemachus, written by Gluck, with whom Mozart had frequent interactions. And it was performed in Vienna, not just for any occasion, but it was written for the wedding of this fellow, the emperor to be Joseph II, who would be the Holy Roman Emperor from 1765 to 1790. His philosophy was known as benevolent despotism. So he's a monarch in the vein of Idomeneus from the Telemachus novel by Fénelon. And not only that, but this is the real clincher. Remember that Mozart wrote Idomeneo for the carnival season in Munich in 1781? Well, in 1780, the carnival opera in Munich was Telemaco by this fellow, Franz Paul Grue. So where on earth does that leave us? I'd like to just close by talking again about Electra. Electra, it's funny, in most synopses of this opera, when she enters with the explanation, Electra, who's resting on Crete following the Trojan War. And I always think, resting from what? Resting from like murdering her mother and kill and together with her. Oh, it's like resting from what? And I wondered, at what point does Electra enter the story? Is it in Mozart's opera? It's not. It's in Compra's opera. Um, so I'm not totally sure what she's doing there, except as this foil, not only to Ilya, but also to Idomeneo. It's sort of like, what would happen um, if Idomeneo did kill his son? What would that set in motion? We don't want the values of the ancient Greeks. We want the values of our benevolent despot. That's a huge part of what I think Electra is doing in this opera. It's a huge part of what I think Mozart is doing also by humanizing her. He allows us to see her as a fully fleshed out character, not only as some cartoonish version. She gets to be a human also, and that really is the Enlightenment project at its finest. So that was a lot to pack into. I guess maybe it's an hour and 5 or an hour and 10 minutes. I know that now Max is going to read some of your questions. I really look forward to hearing them. And I thank you all so much for having me. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. That was really wonderful. I know, especially at the beginning when you were breaking down all of the music to look out for, that's a really enjoyable part of the lectures for our audience, and it makes the opera super enjoyable too. Um, so, thank you for sharing with us.
Sure, my pleasure.
Um, the lecture has ended, and we're going to get into Q&A. So if anyone wants to hop off, we will be uploading this to YouTube within 24 hours as well. But I'm going to start reading everyone's questions now, and Rebecca will answer them. First off, we have a question. Does Athena guide Odysseus on his journey back to Ithaca in the Odyssey? Um,
I don't know. Athena, Athena does guide Telemachus on his journeys in this novel written by Fénelon. But I don't know if she guides Odysseus. It's a great question.
um, I think you probably know we're doing Electra in the
I do
2025-2026
know.
season.
Yes.
Um, what can you say about sort of the interplay between this depiction of Electra and the one that we see in Strauss?
Well, I mean, Strauss's language allows him to explore a completely different, he just explores characters in a totally different way. For starters, I mean, I'd actually really like to hear Elsa talk about that. I, I, that would be great to do since she's coming back to play Elektra next season. But the Strauss's musical language is all about this kind of um, these extremes of emotion. Um, so he's usually exploring that kind of thing, unlike Mozart, who's weaving us through the I don't know, the finer points of every possible thing in a I'm not it's more he's more interested in emotion as it relates to reason and unreason as opposed to, how the extent of unreason.
Yeah.
And sorry, Elsa's not playing Electra, she's playing
Chrysothemis, I think.
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
But anyway, I'd love to hear her talk about that question.
Yeah. Well, maybe we'll have to ask.
Yeah.
Um, but
Um,
you're receiving a lot of compliments. They're coming in Q&A, just so you know.
Oh, that's lovely. I'm
Yes.
glad. Thank you, everybody.
We have another question. Wasn't Joseph the Second brother of Marie Antoinette, and did Mozart write the opera for any singer in particular? Are there opera singers who need to be specialists in Idomeneo, like the Wagner singers?
Um, uh, That's like three questions. I
Sorry.
think he was. No, that's great. I forget if he was the brother, the uncle, but closely related. And interestingly, Gluck, when he was living in Paris, was her music teacher, Marie Antoinette's music teacher. Fun fact. But yes, these people are all closely related in various ways. Mozart did write uh, Electra and Ilya for specific singers. They were sisters. Their last name was Wendling. I think I can't remember if it was his first time writing for them. It might have been. Um, they both obviously were able to sing these incredibly high virtuosic roles. And then the third part of that question, Max, had to do with is it a certain kind of soprano? Um,
Yeah, do opera singers need to specialize in Idomeneo the way that they do with?
um, well, actually, yes and no. The roles of Electra and Idomeneo are sung by dramatic voices that also um, can have a lot of agility and also are comfortable singing quite high. So it's not just an agile voice or just a powerful voice, but it's both. So those voices often sing things that do one or the other. Like Matthew Polenzani sings other things that are quite agile. And Elsa van den Heever sings a lot of things that are quite powerful. But you have to have both to sing these two roles in particular.
Yeah. Also, we do have confirmation from one of the audience members about Athena being the
Yeah,
patron of Odysseus. So thank you.
thank you so much.
Um, I there's some question of why Electra is the only person in this opera who doesn't really get a happy ending in any sense. Like, why do you think that was necessary as part of the story, given that it's been modified so much?
That's a really good question. The opera by Campra that this was based on actually doesn't have a happy ending. It ends with Idomeneo or Idomene going mad and I think killing Idamante and maybe some other people. So because it was a French tragédie. But by the time you get to this kind of hybrid opera, again, it's not a I don't know what to call it. But by the time you get to this sort of thing, people wanted the lieto fine. They wanted the happy ending. Um, crisis averted, there's no sacrifice. Why doesn't Electra get a happy ending? I guess one question, the counter question is, what kind of happy ending could she possibly have? Could she marry the king instead? Well, she can't because we know her already. We know that that's not going to be her ending, right? So we can't give her a totally different ending. Maybe that's why maybe that's one of the reasons that Mozart humanizes her. It's to soften for us her unhappy ending, and it makes it real for us. The opera has to have a happy ending, but we all know that people don't all have happy endings. And so by keeping her this three-dimensional character, um, Mozart allows for some kind of emotional realism to stay present as a thread through the whole opera. Those are just some ideas.
Oh, I like that. That's super interesting. I guess maybe one more.
Sure.
You got to check out a dress rehearsal for this specific production at San
Yes.
Francisco Opera. Is there anything you can tell us about like how this sort of sparse, modern, oceanic production contributes to the story? I know you mentioned it, but maybe just like illustrate a little for the audience what they might see when they come to the show.
I love this because I think so much of the story is internal. And so I think that having this sparse modern production, it allows us to experience that story without being distracted by any particular set of images. Um, I hope I'm always hesitant to criticize any production, but when I watched the Met production, the first thing I thought of when Electra came when she came on stage in that Elizabethan costume was, oh, it looks like Queen Elizabeth. And I thought, well, that really is asking us to view Electra in a very particular way culturally, but I think the music humanizes her more than that, and I'm sure that Elizabeth II or Elizabeth I, was quite human, but we don't view her that way culturally.
It's a
When
bit
she,
villainous looking.
yeah,
Yeah.
so I think a spare production allows the psychodrama, the psychological um, story to really come through. And I also think, having seen some of the projections, we really feel the storm in this production. It's pretty powerful. I think it's fabulous.
Apparently, a lot of the footage was captured off the coast of Tasmania or something. Like it was
Mhm.
really supposed to be very evocative and stormy. Um, Also,
Yeah,
I'm thinking this is a little random, but the Electra's costume for the Met production, it sort of reminds me, have you seen that Queen of the Night um version that the Royal Ballet and Opera did? Like the really vampy, like the headpiece and stuff. It very much reminds me of that for some reason.
yeah. Yeah,
All
well,
right.
I mean, her rage is very much a performative rage. I mean, there are lots of things in Magic Flute that are more cartoonish. There are lots of things that aren't. But it's why it translated so beautifully into that cartoon version that you guys sponsored, right? That went into opera in the schools, and it captures those elements of the opera. But I don't think there's anything in this that's cartoonish. I think it's quite real.
Yes. That was Pocket Opera did a really fabulous animated version.
Didn't San Francisco Opera or the Guild take part in that in some way, sponsor it, or I can't remember.
We distributed it. So we
Yes.
went into schools and we did these sort of events and we brought the cast in and it was really,
Yeah.
really cool. Yeah,
Well, I showed it, I got to watch it, because I was preparing Magic Flute Talks, and my then 10-year-old kids watched that pocket opera production and they loved it.
that's so cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Rebecca. And thank you everyone for coming.
Thanks so
Um,
much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
right. On YouTube in 24 hours, everyone. All right.
Great.
Well, thank you, Rebecca, for a wonderful preview. And if you, hopefully, you can get to the San Francisco Opera to see this Idomeneo live. But if not, it will be live streamed on Friday, June 20th at 7:30, and then on demand June 23rd to June 25th. And we will be back, but first I want to say thank you. Thank you to all our wonderful speakers. Thank you to Max Morgan Butcher, who's been at the controls and is just very, very important to all our programs. Thank you to Lauren Erickson for her wonderful introductions and to all of our members of the preview committee. And hopefully we will see you for when the 2025-26 season. We will have previews of each and every opera, beginning with Rigoletto, September 4th at 6 p.m. That'll be our live preview. But you can also, if you go online, San Francisco Opera previews or preview San Francisco Opera, you can find it by Googling. You can find out the schedules, and you can also see our previews live in San Jose, Lafayette, San Rafael, and Sonoma. Just be sure to check the website. Thank you again for joining us this last season and looking forward to seeing you the next season. See you at Rigoletto. Thank you. Good night.